Alright guys, welcome to Vancouver Island. This is a very, very, very big island. It is the 42nd largest island on planet Earth. If you kind of imagine that my entire arm here is the island, and that where my fingers curl here, this is the little peninsula that we just came in on. We're not going to leave that peninsula for the entire day. That's how big the island is. If we wanted to drive all the way to the northern tip of Point Hardy from here, it would take us close to 8 hours. It's a massive, massive place, and it's quite scarcely inhabited. There are over 700,000 people that live here, which sounds like a lot, but the island's 450 kilometers long and 100 kilometers wide. That is not very many people, especially when you consider that almost half the population lives down in Victoria. And then there's another over 100,000 people that live in the next biggest city of Nanaimo. So about 75% of the population lives on the bottom third of the island. The top 2/3 are almost nobody's there. Appreciate everybody coming back on time. It doesn't always happen, and can lead to issues. This year has been pretty good. There was a day last year where everybody came back on time, but we couldn't go anywhere because there was a car in front of us, and the guy never came back to his car. So they searched the whole ferry and they couldn't find him. And then they kind of dreaded the worst, and they figured that he might have gone overboard. Either jumped or fallen overboard. They had the search and rescue team out with the Coast Guard, and they ran his plates to figure out who it was. It turned out that the car belonged to an elderly man from Victoria. And what had happened is this: he lived in Victoria, but he had a son that lived in Vancouver, and so he used to go to Victoria, from Victoria, take the ferry across to Vancouver, stay the night in Vancouver with his son, and then come back the next day. So what had happened on this occasion was he had taken his car across, but almost every other trip that he did this, he would take the bus. And so he drove his car across, stayed at his son's house. The next morning he was on the same ferry as I was with the tour bus. He was parked in front of us, and he went upstairs, and just instinctively he bought a bus ticket, which I guess he normally did. And so apparently what happened was that the people who had the search and rescue team out that had run his plates, they called his wife to let her know what had happened. So they said, "We're really sorry. Your husband never came back down to his car, and he's not on the boat. We think that he might have gone overboard." And she said, "Apparently that's strange because he's sitting right next to me." And so she asked him, like, "Honey, did you leave anything on the ferry?" So, sure enough, the car. Bit of a seniors moment, which is a good segue actually, because kind of the demographic in Victoria is a little bit different than Vancouver. The joke that people in Vancouver say about Victoria is that Victoria is where the elderly go to visit their grandparents, which is a bit of a stretch, but at the same time there's definitely a lot more old folks home, and the demographic's a little bit older here. It's a much slower city. Everything kind of moves at its own pace. Part of the reason is just that it's much more affordable than Vancouver, and so a lot of people will sell whatever condos they have in Vancouver and use that money to retire comfortably in Victoria. It really is kind of an island life out here, obviously, but I mean, people really do things slowly at their own pace. If someone says they're going to be there at 11, they'll be there at 11:30. For us, we're still on mainland time today, so make sure you're on time. This week, actually, when I was coming to Victoria, the first ferry of the day was 25 minutes late because the captain overslept. historically, the industries that have fueled this island have been logging, mining, and fishing. Fishing not as much anymore, but logging and mining are still huge. And you've got a couple towns, particularly in the north of this island, that they're completely industry towns. Towns in which everybody that lives there works in logging. They all work at the mill. And in recent years, a lot of those towns have gone through some hard times where a lot of the lumber that gets exported gets exported to China, and when that goes on to a decline, a lot of people lose their jobs in those towns. And so a lot of young people, they just don't want to work in those industries. They've seen their parents struggle, and they don't want to go down the same road. So what's happened is a lot of young people from the island have become university educated. There's a couple of good schools on the island, and they don't want to work in those fields, and so they end up leaving to go to Vancouver or other major cities where there's more opportunity for work. So now they've set up a bit of a tech sector out here to try to keep some of these young people employed and try to prevent them from leaving for greener pastures. There's a ton of wildlife on this island. About half of the cougars in Western Canada, the four-legged type, they live out here on Vancouver Island. And it's because they need a huge amount of territory in order to be able to live, and this island provides just that. They're very difficult to see. They're incredibly shy and relatively sneaky. They say that for every time you've seen a mountain lion, 10 mountain lions have seen you. They kind of stalk their prey. There hasn't been an attack since 2005 on the island. That attack was a bit of a scary one. It was there's a couple, and they had moved out near a little surf town called Tofino on the west coast, and they lived in a very, very rural setting, and they'd been part of the 1970s back to the land movement, where people were moving back to the land and trying to live off the land and be sort of self-reliant. And one day the lady was out gardening, the guy was inside doing something, and she was attacked by a mountain lion. Really fortunately for her, she had a machete on her that she was using in the garden, and she managed to fight this cougar off. Out in the garden again, and sure enough it attacked her, and she didn't have her machete on her, and it dragged her off into the woods. And very fortunate for her, her husband actually heard her screaming, and so her husband came running out after, and on his way out the door he grabbed a boar spear. So it's a spear that you use to kill wild boar once they're in a trap, and he actually managed to save her life, and he actually killed the cougar. So it's the first time that we know of that anyone's ever killed a cougar without a projectile or a trap, and it's also the first time anyone's ever been attacked twice by a mountain lion. It's like one of those super rare things, like getting struck by lightning. Although apparently there's a guy in Arizona who was struck by lightning 7 times. He was a park ranger. So this little area that we're driving through is actually a really big municipality. It's called Saanich. It's the biggest municipality on the island, and it's kind of interesting. The way that our political system works is that every municipality votes for its own party, and in this province there's typically two major parties that get votes. One is called the Liberal Party, and one is called the NDP, and they're both kind of similar progressive thinking parties, kind of center left. And this particular municipality was the first municipality ever to elect a third party, which was called the Green Party, which is this very environmentally progressive party that focuses almost explicitly on the environment. And it's kind of interesting because they never have enough seats to really hold any real power. And this election, something very strange happened in our province. The two major parties both won they both won exactly 49% of the vote. And this tiny little party won 2% of the vote. What that means is that this tiny little party has all the power, because they can go and vote with whichever other party they want. So this municipality has done something really interesting in our province by voting this Green Party in. So where we are right now, if you looked on a map, the United States border actually we should be part of the United States. The 49th parallel runs north of here, we're below it. But we're in Canada, so what that means is that we're as far south as you can get in Canada. And as a result, this is the mildest climate anywhere in Canada. It never gets very cold here, and it never gets all that hot either. We get 30% less rain here than we do in Vancouver. And so as far as the weather goes, this is a pretty awesome place to live. But the island is so big that the ecosystems are very, very diverse. There's a spot on this very same island called Harrison Lake that gets 10 times as much rain as downtown Victoria does. And it's on the same island. There's a ski resort out here called Mount Washington, which twice in the last 10 years has had more snow than any other resort in the world. The first year I lived here, there was a garbage truck that went through a neighborhood to the right of us, and it was picking up huge garbage containers from some of the industrial zones and just throwing them into the back of the truck. And it turned out that there was a mountain lion, a cougar, that was eating in one of the trash cans, and the guy had no idea it was in there, and so he picked it up, dropped it in the back of the truck. The cougar was uninjured, but was now in the back of this garbage truck. And then the garbage truck went into downtown Victoria, and right outside the Empress Hotel parking lot, the cougar jumped out. And so I'd been here for 2 months when this cougar was roaming through downtown Victoria, and it was there for about 40 minutes before they put it down. So it's kind of like a terrifying moment, because tourism really is a very vastly growing industry here in Victoria. In recent years, it's the fastest growing industry in town. And there's one other tourist town on the island, which is called Tofino. I mentioned it before, and it's a surf town. It's been voted the second best surf town in North America. It's an incredible, beautiful place. The only problem is it's about a 4.5, 5 hour drive from here. It's way out on the west coast of the island. This lake on the right side here, this is where the national rowing team trains. It's one of the only lakes in the country that's almost guaranteed not to freeze over in the winter time. Most of the lakes in Canada are going to have a period of freezing. This isn't one of them. And actually a lot of the national teams train out here. The national soccer team and the rugby team and the field hockey team, they all train out here just because the weather's so good. People are usually kind of surprised that this is the capital city of British Columbia. When Vancouver is this big world-renowned global city, you would imagine Vancouver would hold that position. But there's a reason for it. The first Europeans to come here was under a guy who most of you will probably have heard of, definitely you guys from Australia, James Cook. The same guy who discovered Australia, New Zealand, this part of the world, Vancouver Island, and eventually Hawaii, where he was killed by the locals. But he came out here and he landed and he discovered the island, and a little while longer the Spanish got here as well, and those two countries nearly went to war over this island. And strangely enough, the resource that they were really both after and were competing for, sounds ridiculous, but was sea otters. Sea otters were all over this island, and they were an animal that was worth a ton of money back in Europe. In places like Venice, to have a sea otter pelt and to wear a sea otter pelt was like driving a Lamborghini. it was a sign of affluence and wealth. And so both countries, amongst other things, were looking to exploit the sea otters. And so it got to a point where they nearly went to war, and the Spanish kind of realized that they weren't going to win a war against the British Navy, because the British Navy at the time was probably the strongest in the world, and they knew they couldn't compete. So they signed an agreement on the west coast of this island in a place called Nootka Sound, and the agreement gave the British most of the rights on this island. And so they set up a company that you might have heard of before called the Hudsons Bay Company, and they just started completely just going to town on these sea otters. They hunted them to extinction until there was literally none left, and they had to go and reintroduce them into this ecosystem. But what kind of came of the whole thing was that this company needed a trading post, and so they built a trading post down on the southern bit of the island, and they called it Fort Victoria. That's where we're going to be heading today. What we like to call Old Town Victoria used to be called Fort Victoria. So they had this trading post built there. And then exactly 150 years ago, they set up an agreement that created the Confederation of Canada, which meant that BC was officially a part of Canada, and it meant that they needed to make a capital city of British Columbia. At that time, there was only two major cities. Vancouver was not one of them. The two major cities were Victoria, and the other one was called New Westminster. It's just outside of Vancouver. And so in order to determine what the capital city was going to be, they decided to host a debate. The debate was going to be held between the two mayors of New Westminster and of Victoria. And Victoria, they had a couple of major advantages, and this is a true story. The first major advantage that they had was that the debate was going to be held here in Victoria, and the second major advantage they had was that the mayor of New Westminster, he was a functioning alcoholic. And true story, the night before the debate, the people who were organizing it out here in Victoria, they held a banquet, all you can eat, all you can drink. And the mayor of New Westminster got quite drunk, and the next morning he showed up a few minutes late to the debate. He was a bit disgruntled, his sentences weren't real coherent, and so almost out of default, Victoria was granted the capital city status, which meant a ton of investment from the federal government and from Britain, and it meant that this city was developed much quicker, much more rapidly than New Westminster was. And you're going to start to see, as we get into downtown Victoria, a lot of those old buildings that came about because of this debate. We're going to get off the highway here, and we're going to get onto a street called Blanchard Street, which is actually on your map, but we're still about 10 minutes outside of Victoria. We got to loop all the way around. But Blanchard Street's kind of interesting. It's named after a guy, his name was Richard Blanchard, and you're probably waiting for me to tell you whatever great thing he did. He didn't do anything great. He was actually probably the worst politician that Victoria ever had. He was this guy who, right after Victoria was created, Fort Victoria, the Hudsons Bay Company, this big British company which was running the whole thing, they needed somebody to come over here and be the head of the company in Victoria. And they thought Richard Blanchard was the perfect candidate. He had been trained his whole life to do this kind of thing, to go abroad and to rule a foreign people and to create this kind of colonial environment where you can exploit resources. He'd been living his whole life in India and training under the Raj to learn how to do this exact thing. So they sent him out here, and you kind of have to imagine what this guy looked like. He wore one of those stupid wigs. He spoke very Shakespearean English. Yeah, you know, he hadn't ever really worked a day of hard labor in his life. And then he came out here, and you can imagine what kind of people were living out here. These were guys that had traveled around the world to hunt sea otters. They didn't respond very well to Mr. Blanchard. And within a year of him taking over the company, it was mutiny. He actually was forced to step down and go back to England. But somehow he has this street named after him. So this is Blanchard Street. And the guy who took over from him, his name was James Douglas. The street over from us is called Douglas Street. And he was probably the best politician that the city ever had. Exactly 4 hours to explore the city, so that's time to have a nice sit-down lunch, check out a lot of the shops, and then anything else like the Parliament buildings or the Fisherman's Wharf that you want to do, you should have time to fit all that stuff in before we head out. You'll see just beyond this first store here, Toys R Us, that's the store called the Hudsons Bay Company. So there's still a store, they're still around. They don't really sell sea otter pelts anymore. They're a big department store, like kind of like a Macy's in the US. They sell basically everything. And in almost any major, well actually every major Canadian city, if you want to find the best piece of real estate in the city, find out where the Hudsons Bay Company is. In downtown Victoria, they own an entire block right on the corner of Government and Fort Street. In Vancouver, they own an entire block right on the corner of Georgia and Howe. Every single major Canadian city has that because as soon as the city was established, the biggest company in Canada at the time would have been Hudsons Bay Company. They're one of the oldest corporations in the world, over 400 years old. And I don't know if anyone cares about ice hockey, but in 2011, our ice hockey team in Vancouver made the finals, and they lost to Boston in the finals. And the city had a bit of a meltdown, and they started rioting, and they ended up rioting right into the Hudsons Bay Company, and they pillaged it. They took everything out of it, and the place was robbed dry. And the good thing is that these guys weren't particularly hard to track down because they weren't really criminal masterminds, they were just idiots. And so what they did is they basically the police went onto websites like Craigslist and eBay and just looked at whoever was selling like never before worn Armani this or Gucci that, and they just called them up and arrested them. And then the other thing they did is they set up a website, and the website was basically like a place where you could post photos or videos of the riots, and then if you recognized anyone in anyone else's videos or photos, you could tag them, like you tag your friends on Facebook, and then your friends would get arrested. So they prosecuted over 300 people from those riots. Navy, they have their Pacific base right outside of downtown in a spot called Esquimalt, and that's their recruitment base just up ahead of us here. This old red building. Bad fortune of being a Vancouver Canucks ice hockey fan like myself. We have never ever won a Stanley Cup, and we've been around since 1971. But Victoria, which hasn't had a team in over 80 years, has won a Stanley Cup, and they were called the Victoria Cougars. And nowadays they have a semi-pro hockey team, and that plays in this stadium on the left side here. But mostly what this stadium is used for is concerts. I think 3 weeks ago, It was Elton John that was playing there. And upcoming events, Bob Dylan. So once in a while a big name will show up to Victoria to play here. So when we cross this next street here, when we get a green light, this is Blanchard Street, and if you look way down Blanchard Street to the right, you'll see the gates of Chinatown that lead into Chinatown. So we're going to end up down there in a little bit, where we're just going to loop right around downtown before we get there. Start to see the architecture change a little bit as we get closer to Old Town. It's significantly different than Vancouver is, just because it is quite a bit older, and because it is older, the church had more influence when this city was being built. So you'll find there's much more churches out here than there are in Vancouver. Most of the churches are Anglican. And there's more coffee shops and little cafes than you'll know what to do with here. On the street that we're on, Blanchard, this is probably as far up as you'll walk. If you go any further, you'll hit Cougar Street, which runs to the left of us and is kind of a historic street as well. There's some really beautiful old cathedrals out there. So if you've got the legs for it, then by all means, I recommend walking down Fort Street, which is the next one. The Royal Theatre is just up ahead on the left, so the royal family has been here. And we're just going to loop around right now, and we're going to come right through the heart of downtown. So the street that you're gonna use as your reference point, and it's gonna be the street that I'm gonna turn down, is called Government Street. Government Street is the street that goes right through Old Town, and it's also probably the most tourist-oriented of all the streets. And if you kind of use it as your base, you'll find that most of the other streets that are worth visiting, they run right off of Government Street. So if you kind of just come back to Government Street, then you won't get lost, and you'll see most of what there is to see out here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and give a warning right now that you're not gonna have enough time in Victoria. You can spend a few days out here. It's a beautiful place. So now you've been warned. You'll find too, it's a really colorful city. There's beautiful flower baskets everywhere. Just up ahead on the left, this is the Royal Museum. It's an awesome museum, and it is worth your time. The only thing is, it's worth all your time, and if you go there, you might not see any of see any of downtown Victoria. But that's this spot on the left here. So on your right, you're going to see the side of the Empress Hotel. It's just to the right of us here. And I'm going to turn right, and we're going to get right in front of that hotel. But when I turn right here, if you look out your left-hand window, just on the other side of this big bus to the left of us, you're going to start to see the Parliament buildings come into view. Well, those are the Parliament buildings just up ahead of us there. So guys, this is the most important part. If you haven't listened to anything I've said, just listen to this. This is the Empress Hotel on the right, and you can see the front doors. On the left is a statue of a guy named James Cook. That's where we're going to be meeting at 3:15. Is right in front of that statue. And you can see the inner harbor is right behind it, so it's very, very easy to find. And I'm just gonna drive us right down Government Street right now. This is kind of cool as well. You can see there's this these killer whales that they've made out of plants.
That's wonderful.
Oh yeah.
So if you don't want to have a real sit-down meal, which I would recommend having one, but this place on the right is called Sam's Deli. It's like a really quick sandwich soup salad place, but the food's awesome. I don't know if anyone's heard of this place on the left. It's called Burger King. Don't recommend it. You can do better. This is Government Street right down this way. The best bookstore I've ever been to, if anybody likes to read, is out on this street. It's called Monroe's Books. I'll point it out to you. It's on the left side up ahead. So that old pub that I told you about, that's in one of the oldest buildings in the city, is just up ahead on the left here. It's got the seats outside. This is called the Bar in the Banker, and it's got the best fish and chips in the city, and it's a really gorgeous pub on the inside. Even if you just go in to take a look at it, I recommend it. Bikes around too. These are a pretty good way to get around the city if you don't have sort of the legs to do it. Although the whole place is fairly small. This is the bookstore on the left, Monroe's Books. And then we're just about to pass Bastion Square. So Bastion Square is on the left side here. And this place with the red umbrellas is the Irish Times. And down that way as well, there's a beautiful little vegetarian restaurant called Rhubarb, as well as a spot called The Local, which is where a lot of the locals will go to eat, and the food there is excellent as well. These next couple streets, Yates, Johnson, and Pandora, are all beautiful streets with lots of really cool kind of mom and pop shops. The great thing about Victoria is because it's a lot more affordable than Vancouver, there's a lot more kind of small, no-name shops that sell real novelty items that you wouldn't maybe be able to find as easily in Vancouver. So take a look up and down these streets. So this next street up ahead of us is called Johnson Street, and if you look way down the street on the left as we cross the intersection, that is where the Italian restaurant Il Terrazzo is, where I put a little mark on all your maps and mark that, and right across from it is a spot called the Market Square. Market Square is a really cool place with some interesting shops as well. That's worth checking out. I'm going to take us down Pandora Street right now, and I'm going to drop us off right near Fantan Alley. And this is where you can kind of just start your day. If there's anybody that would rather get out back where the Parliament buildings are, although I would recommend getting out here, you're welcome to stay on the bus and I'll loop you back around, but that's up to you to decide. If you look on your right here, you're going to see Fantan Alley. Just down this way here. I'm just going to pull us in behind this truck, so just sit tight for a moment.